Oi, tudo bem? Welcome to RegenMigrants, where migration meets regeneration. My name is Lila, and today we're speaking to Mo, and I'm really excited. We just had a little bit of a catch up, but I'm really excited for you to learn more about what he's working on. So, Mo, would you mind introducing yourself?
Of course. Thank you very much, Laila. And very grateful and humbled to be here today and be part of your evolving experiment, as you called it so nicely. So my name is Mo. I'm originally from Yemen. I grew up in Germany the majority of my life. So I moved to Germany when I was 7 years old. And ever since been kind of hopping around the world. So I've lived in multiple countries, including studied in Scotland, business management and marketing, and then kind of went on a further journey to Italy, Amsterdam, bit back to Germany, to Munich, and now currently live in Portugal, in Porto. So I've been in Portugal for the past 2 years, and I feel like I'm very suitable for this podcast because I feel like I'm a evolving migrant that continuously migrates.
Amazing. I love that you're the second person that's now in Portugal that I'm speaking to, and also the second person that went to Germany and then ended up in Portugal. So different or maybe originating backgrounds, but a very similar trajectory, which I think is quite cool. And maybe to have that as evolving part of the conversation, how has those transitions from very different places, how has that affected you and your work as well? How is that showcased in your trajectory?
Sure. I think my work really started as a teenager when I was kind of conflicted in two worlds, both joining and participating and leading my Model United Nations kind of club and activities at school. So basically a mock-up or a simulation of the UN, which I'm sure few maybe people listening.
Buddies, I know it.
So I was very enthusiastic about that. Actually, when I moved to Germany, my dad brought us to Germany, or the reason we ended up in Germany was because my dad got a job at the United Nations Climate Change Committee. And so I was very embedded in kind of the UN world and the Sustainable Development Goals world, as well as climate change, because that's the department my dad even worked in. Yet at the same time, like many migrants, I think moving at a young age, I was very enthusiastic about becoming an entrepreneur. And I fell in love with business and digital marketing. And I think that those two sides kind of continued and evolved as I continued evolving as a professional and my career kind of evolved as I funded a couple of businesses along the way, ones that were more on the side of the UN side, so more of the international development side that were a lot less about business, and then others that were more on the right side. And I think over the years, I've kind of started finding a middle path and seeing my career as one and seeing how I can embed both the business and really social and environmental development. How I've been affected through all these transitions, I think it definitely always gives me a nice way to reset, to zoom out, to reflect on what I've been doing, but also on how different cultures operate, how how there's so many differences yet so many similarities. I think that's also one big lesson that I've been learning over and over again. Recently, I've also had the pleasure of, for example, working with Portuguese employees or colleagues and also clients. And since being here, I think that's been also a very nice experience to also start to merge my professional as well as my kind of living situations, if that makes sense. But I think the biggest thing is just to zoom out and reflect around, how are things working around the world and how are societies feeling, how are they operating, how do people interact with one each other, and what are the core values I think that different cultures could bring with them. And even though, like I said, there's been so many amazing kind of differences that I've been spotting, there's even more similarities, which is, I think, a very nice lesson.
There are so many things that I took notes in that I'm so excited to jump into, and I think each one is part of a larger conversation in itself. So I'm going to try to keep them where I see that's maybe the most impactful, where I've never thought about that. But you're one of the first kids of UN people that have been working for climate change for a long, long time. And maybe to you it isn't, because you've probably grew up with these people. But even me that works in sustainability, I don't really have contact with anyone that's been in the UN. The climate change conversation I've been hearing about has happened in the last 10 years. And I can expect that for you, maybe in the last 10 years, maybe a little bit before even, but they became a big part of maybe what was going on in your family whereas within my family, I'm still having to convince my dad that climate change is a thing. But he comes to me and says, oh, I can't hear the birds anymore. So he feels it. There's an intuition, but he won't get into a climate change. Oh, these people just want my money. They're not doing anything, So what would you kind of share with me, your experience or tips, or even vice versa, for us to maybe merge those two universes a little bit?
I hope I'm not going to be a downer.
Please,
but
we're here for the truth.
let the truth be spoken. So really, even though you probably are fighting a very different battle, I grew up with going to different birthday parties of all these different UN children. And one of the common thread is most people that work in the UN are very distant from what's happening. So yes, I grew up knowing a lot about climate change, yet not very, not within a family culture. And that's also partially also of my kind of heritage culture as well. So like in the Middle East, if we look at that in general, like the context of the Middle East and the relationship to, for example, climate change, is still also very far behind. And I think that's also has been reflected in my family, but at the same time, it's also been reflected in every other family that I visited, that I've had dinners with or went to birthday parties with. People are aware of it that work in the UN, but are usually just in it because it's a job. And this was really sad to see. And this was one big reason why I wanted to go down the entrepreneurship and business path, because I was getting diluted with the big NGO world myself. I actually met quite a few people in the UN who are extremely knowledgeable and who are very activist in how they approach their work, but they're worn out. Most of them are worn out and actually don't progress within the UN system because it is a pretty outdated, pretty centralized way of trying to tackle climate change. And actually, it's been pretty embedded within our whole capitalistic system as well. So yes, I've grew up aware of these things. My 5th grade presentation, end of year presentation, was the effect of the greenhouse gases and what that has into what the effect was into our atmospheres. But I actually also grew up with this notion that, things are the way they are and we can't change them. And it's the way things are running. And sadly, this has actually been a recent voice exchange I had with my dad, which was about the whole kind of Palestine-Israel war that's happening right now. And not just that, but many other wars like the Yemen war that happened 10 years ago and many others around the world. And again, my parents' kind of mindset has been like, it's just the way it is and we don't have control over it. So let's just continue life because we can't do much more. And again, I think there is, I was very proud at one point that my dad was working in the UN. Again, the more I dig deeper, the more I realized the reasons why most people are in the UN is not because they want to change the world. And it's not because they see change as something that's possible or something that is, in the roadmap and that they have big influence on. It's more about being in that environment of internationalism. It's more about the benefits that you get. It's more about even feeling like you're working towards something that makes or that has meaning. But when it comes to optimism level, I think most people in the UN would be the least optimistic about climate change.
Wow, that's terrifying, as you said, to think about, right? Because you want to be able to be getting reassurance from somewhere, right? And I've been having a lot of inner thinking because my family was super religious when I was growing up, and I wanted to be a priest, but I couldn't be a priest because I was a woman. And then you kind of go down the religious hole. And then I noticed I also lost my spirituality, and I became very, okay, the government knows what's best for me, the schools know. And then also lost a little bit of that intuition to kind of, how do I trust myself which I think a lot of people that have religions, that have beliefs, they're able to say, I'm doing the best I can and something's going to sort out. And I'm trying to connect the dots here because I loved what you were talking about, the centralization of these really big organizations that we put all of our cards on. And then these ideas, okay, I'm going to become an entrepreneur. And then people, oh, I'm going to become a solar entrepreneur. Oh, I'm going to become a unicorn, because we're such digital natives that we only think about the technology, but we don't really think about the people involved. And so one, how can we get those entrepreneurs that have maybe gone through similar circles to you? What would be the next step up, you know? And my question links in, do you think it's the decentralized movement that's coming now from, I know Portugal has a lot of people working with decentralized organizations. What's kind of what you said in the very beginning, which is a very famous Buddhist saying, and maybe other religions as well, is finding the middle path. What to you today is like the perfect middle path where you can walk these things that your parents say, oh, we can't get over?
Well, I mean, maybe connecting to everything that you just said. So starting with the middle path, I think the middle path is understanding what the objective or purpose truly is of what you're trying to achieve as an entrepreneur, as a professional in general. So truly finding your purpose. And I would highly recommend the Ikigai exercise, for example, an ancient Japanese philosophy around finding purpose. And there's multiple different examples of these frameworks from around the world. So man was not the only one that had framework to help, the people to try to understand their own purpose and life mission. I think that's really important to walk any path, is you need to understand where you're walking towards. Something that I didn't have when I went full on business, and I went anti-NGO and anti-everything and just wanted to build the next unicorn, as you very nicely outlined most of us would go through. My personal journey, though, on to finding or going on a quest to find the middle path, which is a very religious term, which again, I also had my fair share of hating religion and hating spirituality and coming back to it. I think I only came back to it through personal hardship, through personal breakdowns, through mental health crises, through depression, through anxiety, through times where I've been so low where I needed to question my existence. And then kind of with my own will, if you'd like, and with the support of many others around me that I reached out for help, eventually led me to the path of trying to follow this middle path or be on a quest to understand what that means. I think ultimately it's, are you very clear on what you want to change in the world? Are you very clear on the deep why behind what you're doing day in, day out? And this is something that became extremely important to me before I started my business Super Growth, before I decided to be on, to set myself on a mission to transform the marketing industry and to make it focused on regeneration, to utilize the next wave or next generation of marketers to basically create catalysts of change all over the world. That's my personal mission. That's the mission I'm still on. And even that mission by itself is very big, grandiose, and still needs more clarity. So I'm constantly still trying to refine and redefine it. But that is how I see going into the middle path. Another thing what I meant with the middle path is to look at business, for example, as tools, as mechanisms to achieve certain things. But then to look at the social element that you just mentioned, the negative elements. It's the duality between the dark and the light, right? It's trying to understand what are the negative effects that could come with business, especially traditional business, especially with, if you, as you mentioned, larger centralized systems, and what are the pros, the lighter sides of it, and how can we start to balance those out? And I think there is never going to be a perfect balance. Even when people ask me, what does regenerative business mean? I think it's sometimes hard to explain it in words. And I think it's going to be the mission that we're, or at least people within this, movement are on in the next decade, is to really clearly define and communicate what regenerative business is going to look like. But even from the top experts, and I've talked to so many regenerators around the world, there's always a bit of, unknownness in it. And I think that's part of what regenerative business is going a bit into the unknownness, because actually everything that you can track fully is probably not regenerative. So it's probably a philosophy and mindset that got introduced to me. The more I reflect, like I said, the more I understand how important the low points were points of my burnouts, of my depressions, and how getting up from that and recovering and regenerating has helped me see, different ways of looking at the world and at business. And also made me realize that nothing is so black and white. So even if you're a regenerative business, doesn't mean that you're the perfect business. If you're purely a sustainable business, if you're not sustainable at all, it means that you could. And I've met founders and business owners who run strongly non-impact businesses, and I had discussions with them, but that totally prioritize social, equity, for example, or community care, or employee well-being. So A, it's not black and white, and two, it's an ongoing quest of what that middle path is. And I think it's really funny to hear the overlaps of you maybe going away from spirituality and religion. I think spirituality has a big part on what a regenerative business is. I think finding one's purpose is spiritual in its essence, asking existential questions like, why do we need to even survive tomorrow? And what's the point of creating systemic change? All those are pretty existential questions. And it doesn't mean that you have to believe in a God or you need to have a uniform kind of approach of believing in God, but it's probably the acceptance that there are things bigger than us, and there is, the divine energy even within nature, which also includes us.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting to think about, because I've sometimes get onto some media which say some things that I don't understand. And so this person was not of a pagan religion, and he said, "Oh, well, these people are just want to take care of nature and have nature as their thing that they reference, and they're just pagans." And I was like, one, you're saying bad things about another religion, can you not? But two, wouldn't that be the thing that we should? Like, we can all, each one have your God, your religion, your ideas, but couldn't we all come to the conclusion that this is the only planet in the known universe with all the science that we have that has a human like you and me, and that maybe with taking all of this spirituality or religion, maybe we should take care of it for a little while. Maybe not even thinking about the 7 generations, maybe thinking just about yours. Like, some people are not even wanting to have kids because they don't want their kids to maybe grow up in the climate wasteland that it could be, And so maybe all of that to bring you back to your question, how do you land on marketing? How is marketing so important to that? Because I think today everything is now a storytelling tool, and marketing has become really good at telling good stories, and good stories are what changes behavior. And so how did you approach this, and what are some examples of the work that you're doing that you're like, yes, I'm in the right direction?
Sure. I got into marketing very early on. So I became a freelancer when I was 16. And I started building very bad websites for my local barbershops in Bonn, Germany, where I still live. Got paid in €2 coins in a huge bag, and drove back on a bus and was very happy and excited about it. But then eventually worked with multiple startups, created my own startups, closed my startups, worked in an advertising agency in Italy for a year that was very specifically focused on Google AdWords and Google Ads. So basically anything that you type on Google and you see the first 3-4 results, as probably someone who is working in an agency like I used to work in, who would prop that up. And I've worked also in a corporate innovation consultancy where I was the senior growth marketer there. So basically I set up their marketing department with a focus on experimenting and using the cycles of experimentation to accelerate their growth. Really, that was the main focus. And that was shortly before my burnout. Now, I think what led me to marketing is very interesting, because the few things that I started to fall in love with in marketing is the psychology, the human behavior, like you stated very well, and communications. Marketing is primarily communications. How do we communicate one element or one topic with a specific group of people? I've become a huge fan of communication in general. So more specifically, I've become a huge fan of nonviolent communications and understanding almost the science and the psychology behind the words that we choose, and how some words can have a drastic effect on another person. It is our main means of talking. Yes, 80% of our of communication is body language, but in terms of, for example, posters or adverts, often it's also the words that we hear or images that are inserted in our heads that can help us, for example, want to contribute to a specific cause. It can also trigger us to be defensive, and it can also change perspectives and open new ways of seeing things. Like you mentioned a second ago, storytelling is everywhere, and it's one of the most powerful tools we have. And sadly, it's been hyper focused and hyper extracted, if you like, by the people who are purely wanting to manipulate the masses and create more control in certain, sections of governments or businesses in general. One of the forefounders of marketing was one of the grandsons of Freud, and they were using psychological theories with a very clear objective of how can we then consult governments to control the masses. Now, I've became aware of all those things after working in marketing quite a long time. And I recognized how harmful that is, how it is one of the main causes of our overconsumption culture, and how it is accelerating all the damage that businesses are doing, right? It's an acceleration tool. But just like I was saying before on the light and the darkness, I think we can accelerate lightness just like we can accelerate darkness. And yes, marketing has been used to do awful things in the world, to control the masses, to increase consumption when consumption is not needed, and to change people's minds based on their fears and traumas. But imagine if we flip that around and actually try to see the future of marketing as one of our key tools to help us progress, help us come together, help us unite, help us see the beauty in the world and in nature, help us to give us the hope that we require in the future. What about marketing being one of the key tools that allows our impact organization to accelerate their impact? To actually maximize their impact. And yes, we need to change how marketing is done and how we think about marketing, how we even frame marketing. I've been talking to quite a few in the space that are wanting to even abolish the term marketing, which I'm also now becoming very open to and questioning myself. So now really I'm on a path to understand, what does the future of marketing look like? How can we embed these regenerative principles of life, principles of healing, principles of how nature even communicates? So one analogy me and my team have been talking a lot about is, how can we become the mycelium of business, right? How can we become the weavers, the ones that help businesses redistribute resources, the ones that help convey the right messages at the right time, to inspire, to change people's perspectives in the most positive way, to, instead of hide people's true needs and cover them with their triggers and trauma, to help them to go within and actually help them become more self-aware and step up to make their own decisions around if they need a specific product or service, or if they want to follow a certain cause or social or environmental kind of issue and actually do something against it. So that's maybe my take on marketing so far and my journey so far, and it's still pretty evolving. We are just currently, as you know, in the process of launching a regenerative marketing committee, where we're currently deeply discussing these elements and wanting to understand, how does this first version of the regenerative marketing world look like? And what is the story or narrative that we want to start telling about marketing? Because also us overly fixating that marketing is the devil is harming a lot of social enterprises and socially driven businesses all over the world. And I've witnessed that firsthand. Not only from the NGO background from my dad, but also whilst setting up my first social enterprise and really getting embedded in Scotland. This is where I was studying, really getting embedded with the social enterprise community and constantly realizing that I was one of the few in the room that could actually tell someone how to write up a story, or how to target specific people, or how we can create a process to actually ensure that we're measuring conversion rates so we understand our efficiency, and effectiveness. These were things that people were very shy of, scared of, and almost again categorized as the devil. But guess what? They also always struggled to grow for the past 10 years. They were stagnating in growth, and their impact was minimal and wouldn't change year after year after year. Whereas they had such good hearts and they had such amazing business models and ideas to create more prosperity in the world. So I think it's also trying to understand, how do we reframe marketing to remove it of being the devil, of being the greenwasher, but actually of being a core element that's going to accelerate our impact, that's actually going to help shift even the direction of businesses moving forward. Because at the true essence of a brand lays its purpose and its, reason of being, and ideally everything within a business decision should be influenced by that. So I think it also means we need to take marketing more seriously. We need to understand that marketing has a very, very big role in how organizations are run, or how organizations change, or what kind of products or services organizations start serving. So we're trying to tackle that on the more smaller scale, and the people that are, maybe already interested in this. But I see marketing as one of the biggest tools moving forward to change our economy and change the way we do business. And just to give you a little teaser, most people that are in marketing and are starting to realize the negative consequences of marketing are the ones that are wanting to change the most as well. And, if you go on LinkedIn and you look at the different job descriptions that people are looking for, the majority of companies are looking for marketers, because marketers are in demand and are only growing. Now imagine the next generation of marketers are the ones that want to actually object and challenge the fact that we're wanting to grow just because of growth's sake, that actually we are growing without taking ethical risks into consideration, and we're not thinking enough about the ethical risks associated with it, that we're growing in trying to compete with others rather than thinking of ways we could collaborate and maximize our impact. We're growing with metrics that are only focused on finance, and they're not focused on the systemic change that is the main reason why we even exist, right? So I imagine this next generation of marketers being a key catalyst of change for businesses worldwide. And this is really why I'm so passionate about this topic.
No, I love you, and I love people like you that kind of bring their passion into their work. Because people say, "Oh, love what you do. That's great," but can you kind of bring all that passion all the time, even with the lows, even with the no money, even with the everything in between, that we know what it is to be working for something you're so passionate about. And we're getting to the end of the podcast, and I'd love to kind of get you in just a philosophy conversation one day. A good thing if you're ever in Germany. And same to me, maybe if I'm ever in Portugal, we could definitely connect. But what I normally like to do is I like to say bye from here to everybody and ask you to finish in a inspiring, motivative way that maybe makes sense. And so we've had people that I have asked them, what would you tell other people? I have had somebody do a poem. I can also ask you something along the lines of, hey, imagine you're 90 years old and you're kind of reflecting back, what would you want your story to be told? So think of those, what makes more sense to you, what kind of tingles, and I'll say goodbye, and we'll talk in the outro.
I think I'm going to mention one quote that I often mention when I give talks, which is one that really helps me also redefine how I see marketing and how I see activism in general. And that is by Rumi, one of the greatest Sufi mystic and poems. And it starts like this: "It is rain that grows flowers, not thunder." And I'm just going to pause there. I think the poem continues, and I'm not going to read it all. I think that's just the most important sentence that has been reflecting and bouncing off my head over and over again. It is rain that grows flowers and not thunder. And I used to be an activist, and I used to be in a lot of demonstrations, and I used to like to scream to want to change. But how can we instead look at the change that we want to create as rain, as soft rain that develops and evolves over time, and that nourishes and really feeds and cultivates the seeds that we're planting right now? How can we see it as a process that will take probably a lifetime? Because that's the shift that I have recently made, is I'm now on my life mission. Even though I'm pretty young, it is my life mission. So I'm not in a hurry for this to happen, and I'm doing as much as I can, but I don't want to go into the thunder realm. I don't want to start screaming, because actually screaming makes people defensive and doesn't help change mindsets. how can we look again at all the seeds that we can start to gently water over the next few years? And how can we put our love, care, and attention towards these flowers instead of jumping to the thunder? And I think I'll leave it at that.
Thank you so much. Muito obrigada. That was beautiful.
Muito obrigado.
See you all.